the Honourable Minister for Local Government, Environment, Infrastructure and Housing, Honourable Praveen Kumar Bala, the Tui Wainunu, the Commissioner Northern, the Chairman of the Organising Committee, Special Administrator, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me much pleasure to be here this morning. This is the last location for the celebrations to commemorate the arrival of the last ship, Sutlej 5 as has been said, that brought in the last group of indentured labourers from British India. Some may say we've saved the best for the last. So Labasa is the last place we're celebrating this to commemorate it. And I'm glad that we're here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, this event marks the end, as we've said, of one of the darkest, yet one of the most significant eras in Fijian history. The transportation of indentured labourers from British India 100 years ago, and that is when the last settlers arrived. The legacy of those indentured labourers, the Girmitiyas, can be seen throughout Fiji to this day. It not lives on in their descendants only, but the determined, tenacious spirit of the Girmitiyas serves as a source of inspiration for every Fijian. For the young students over here, some of you actually may not know why these indentured laborers were called Girmitiyas. When the British ended slavery, slavery still continued in America. The British, in fact, had sent slaves to South Africa, the West Indies, South America. So did the Portuguese, the Spanish, and of course, millions went to USA, what we call USA today. But when the British said, okay, we will now end slavery, they still needed people to work like slaves. So to make it sound nice, they called them indentured laborers. And what they said was that this is going to be an agreement between the employer and the employee. In other words, the person is going to work and the person is going to hire them. So they told all these British Indians, they said, this will be an agreement. So the British Indians could not say agreement. They said girmit. Because they found it hard to say agreement. In the same way, we say kantap, which is actually cane top. Those of you may not know. So they called it Girmit, so they became known as the Girmitiyas. Now, the legacy, of course, as has been highlighted the previous speaker, has made Fiji a proud nation it is today. Because despite the immense adversity faced by the Girmitiyas, they forged new lives for themselves in Fiji and ultimately overcame their struggle. Between 1879 and 1916, some of you in school may know about Leonidas, which is the first ship that brought the indentured laborers. These ships made a total of 87 voyages carrying British Indian indentured laborers to Fiji. Often at times they were lured away from their homes with false promises. These Girmitiyas endured the grueling journey from India. They suffered demeaning treatment from the overseers, and they slaved away under violent, repressive work conditions. They were often abused, they were whipped, they were beaten up if they did not follow instructions. And you'll hear some of the stories later on. Due to the high cost of returning back to British India, many of them had no choice but to stay in Fiji. In the face of such misery, while it would be easy to abandon hope and despair and give in to that despair, instead they persevered. The Girmitiyas' contribution to this nation began the very day they set foot in Fiji, building roads, clearing land, harvesting sugarcane. The success of Fiji's colonial economy depended heavily on their sweat, effort, and talents. Here in Labasa, of course, it is wonderful to see so many Fijians here to commemorate this important day. As we all know, the history of Girmitiyas is also the history of Labasa. Some of the Girmit descendants of those who are born to Settlers 5 are with us here today, and on behalf of the Fijian people, we wish to pay tribute not only to the contribution the ancestors made to building our nation, but our own contribution as well. Some of these descendants of those who were the settlers, of course, we will see that they have made that contribution and they are here with us today, and we will honor them with a plaque that we will give them today. Your ancestors played a huge role in the development of Labasa and the surrounding region, and we give thanks for the part they played in laying the foundation of what we know today. They cleared the land and worked the sugarcane fields that supplied the Labasa mill, which was established in 1894. The first so-called coolie line, as they were called, where the indentured laborers lived, they called them coolies, for the indentured laborers, was established by CSR near Labasa town, where the Madhwata building stands today on the other side of the river. But later, a flood forced this settlement to be relocated to Bangani Vanua area, where the foundation of the old lane can still be seen today. In 1922, Labasa's main trading center was established. The Girmitiyas called it Nasea Town. And as the years passed, Labasa grew to the point where it was declared a township in 1939, and eventually it became a full-fledged town, being declared that in 1972. The first market in Labasa was located at Vulovi, on the outskirts of the sugar mill during the Girmitiyas era. As the years passed, the Girmitiyas, who first settled in the Tanganikula sugarcane plantation near Wainikoro, spread to Bunivalu, Basonga, Bulileka, Bunimoli, Bolalevu, and Draketi in the Malwaka province. Other Girmitiyas, of course, also settled in Tabiri as copra cutters for the white settlers and the large estate owners. As in other parts of Fiji, the Girmitiyas began some of the religious places and social organization that has always been part of their lives. In villages, towns, and cities all across Fiji, we can still see the stories of the Girmitiyas all around us. These stories are part of the story of Fiji. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important that these celebrations or these commemorations we've been holding for the past 3-4 days is a very significant step. Because if you look at the overall history of Fiji, or what you call the narrative of our country, the experience of the indentured laborers has been wiped out, has not been included. And in fact, you will hear very soon some actual accounts of actual Girmitiyas and what they went through. So when our school books were written, when the history books were written, and they were written during the British days, and they of course carried on after independence, these stories and these experiences and the conditions under which these people were brought to Fiji was not recorded. It was not included in our school syllabus. It was not taught in our school syllabus. Any country, whether it's USA, whether it's South Africa, whether it's any other country, to be a mature country, to be a modern nation state, we must always be comfortable with where we came from. When I say where we came from, I don't mean the country. I mean where we came from in terms of what has been our history. That narrative is missed out. Just as the Hitauke people, they had many issues that they faced when the first settlers came. A lot of those stories aren't told. They're not included in the narrative. How some of the land was taken away. In the same way, the experience of the indentured laborers, those narratives have not been included. So we must understand, we must recognize, and we must be able to put that within our historical context to be able to be a mature country, to be able to be a strong country. Because it is only through the realization of that history we'll be able to be comfortable in terms of going forward. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to now stop for a little while and highlight to you and get a few people to read a few stories. In the early 1970s, the first real scholar of the indenture period, post-independence, was an academic at USP called Dr. Ahmad Ali. Dr. Ahmad Ali actually was quite lucky in that he was able to interview actual Girmitiyas, people who were alive and who had served Girmit. Today in Fiji, there is nobody alive who actually was a Girmitiya. So he was lucky to be able to record their experience. What they told him, he then translated or transcribed it into a book. So today, we're going to have 6 of those stories read out to you. And please listen to it in silence because you'll understand what these people went through. So the first Girmitiya, whose name is Lakpat, and you'll now hear the story of Lakpat.
I asked where I would be sent. On being told that it would be Fiji, I inquired of its whereabouts. I was told that it was close to Calcutta and I could go there willingly. Since it was not a jail, I could return when I wanted to. I was scared lest these people were merely luring us someplace where they might kill us. There was a great deal of weeping when we embarked on the ship. People wept because they were leaving their families or their homes. Many of the women were upset because they had been lured from marketplaces where the recruiters had misled them. I cried because I was leaving everything behind and did not know where I was going. Nobody knew where Fiji was. These recruiters had misled us and bluffed us into going. I, for instance, had quite a good home. There was no need for me to leave. From Calcutta, we went to Madras, then past Singapore. It took us a month before we reached Fiji. Life was very painful on the ship. For 2 weeks, I was well. Then I became ill and parts of my body began to swell up. When we arrived in Fiji, we were all herded into a punt like pigs and taken to Nukalau, where we stayed for 2 weeks. We were given rice that was full of worms and kept and fed like animals.
The story of Abdulaziz. I left India because I was told I would receive a shilling a day to work in Fiji. I went to Naitasiri to serve my Girmitiyas. For a month, I spent my time crying. When I got to Naitasiri, I thought that I would never see my parents again. But after shedding tears for a month, I decided I must work despite my despair. On our sugar estate, some who did not learn about cane cultivation were given a thorough beating. Our state was bad enough, but there were others, far worse, where people were disgraced completely. I did not like to work at all, but I told myself that if I did not work, I would die of starvation. There were only two alternatives. Two. Work or interest.
The story of Mahadev. I was 16 when I came to Fiji. I was unmarried and an orphan. My parents had died in an epidemic. I came to Fiji because I was lured by a man who asked me if I was looking for work. There were around 200 migrants on my trip who were transported in deplorable conditions. Once we reached Fiji, I was sent to Dubu via Notoka. There, I was set the task of cutting grass. If we did not finish the set task, we were not paid for the day because of incomplete work. There was a South Indian with us. He used to do a lot of singing and dancing, but he was not able to work much, and he used to get a terrible beating from the overseer. So one day, he got some rope, went into the bush, and hung himself. I have lost many friends during my indenture. We used to think of home, but what was the purpose of it? Home was so far away, and even if we wanted to go, we could not because we had no money. I saved no money during my indenture. Besides, in any case, I had nobody in India, so for me, there was no person or place to return to. Despite such treatment, I had no choice but continue to live on and survive.
The story of Mahabir. There was no conflict with Fijians in those days. If you gave them something, they reciprocated. During indenture days, some Indians would run away and go to a Fijian village. They were given shelter there as well as provided with food. If you took Elgona into a village, then all of them would share what they had with you. In the very early days, they used to smell the roti first, then throw it away. It was later that they learned to eat it.
The story of Lotan. Europeans used to beat up people who did not do their work. Some overseers insisted that if one of us was wearing a hat, then on meeting them, we must take it off and say salam to them. If we did not oblige, we were punished. They used to call us boy and treat us like children. We did not know what boy meant, so at first we thought that boy was a term for something good. When Indians behaved as though they were children, Europeans treated them well. But if they asserted themselves and tried to be like the Europeans, then they found themselves in trouble. Assertion of equality led to a thrashing.
The story of Pancham. If you were given the task of loading a truck with cane, you had to do so until you had completed it, even if it meant walking into the evening. If the cane fell because of bad loading, then you had to restart and complete the task. By the time I had completed my work one night, it was nearly 1 a.m. And when I got home, cooked and eaten, it was 4 a.m. And at 5 a.m., I had to go back to work for another day. Once the overseer gave us a task and told us we had to finish it, otherwise he would whip us. When he returned at 3 o'clock, some people had not completed the task, so he whipped them as he had promised. Except for the 3 of us in our gang, everyone was beaten. Although there were many of us, we could not combine to retaliate against him. We were frightened because the government would be on his side. The Australian overseers who used to come knew how to herd cattle or drive animals, and this is how they behaved towards human beings as well. They bought the methods they had used on animals and used them in dealing with laborers. It was just as well that indenture lasted only 5 years. Had it been for 6 years, I would prefer to have been dead, and even perhaps by my own hands. During the 5 years, I counted the days each day to find out how many were left. Those 5 years were 5 years of hell.
Ladies and gentlemen, that puts into perspective what the Girmitiyas actually went through. So today's celebration is not only about those indentured laborers that actually came on Settlers 5, but all those other Girmitiyas who actually came to Fiji. Now, as I've said, that this part of history is not well known at all. In fact, at Albert Park, when we had the national celebrations, some of the people came forward and said, we did not know that these people actually went through this. If you read some of the books, they'll say, oh, the immigrants when they came to Fiji. As you heard from the stories, most of the people who came on the ships did not even know where Fiji was. They thought actually they were going to some other part in India. They did not know that after many months that they brought here, they did not know that they would be whipped. They did not know that there would be sexual exploitation, abuse of children. And as you heard in the last story, nearly every day people got whipped. And that was at the mercy of the overseers. So the recording of these types of stories, we of course can only say so in words. But the words cannot ever really capture the emotion and the pain that these people experienced. So much of what makes our lives fulfilling and enjoyable is found in our relationships, our families, our friends, and our communities. To lose that, to be forced to live and work in isolation, would cause any one of us untold suffering. Transported from a land or from your home to a foreign land, ripped away from your families and lives they knew, this, of course, was quite a tumultuous period for them. But of course they gained their hope, they gained their strength from knowing that one day that it would end. Some, of course, did not survive it. Some killed themselves, and others died because of illnesses or diseases that could have been easily fixed up. But of course, they also realized that their emancipation lay in education. Most of the indentured laborers were illiterate, or the children were illiterate. So this is why they focused primarily on setting up schools in all the communities throughout Fiji. And they knew that education and that knowledge was the best path to a better life. That commitment to education has not faltered since those early days. The Girmitiyas and their descendants have had a major role in creating a more knowledge-based society in Fiji. Every day their work, their values and their sacrifices have helped to build the new modern Fiji and bring advancement into the lives of every Fijian, so that we are all prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities the future holds. We must never forget that while the practice of indenture ended many years ago, that feeling of alienation felt by Fijians of Girmitiya descent persisted for decades. It took 97 years from the arrival of that last ship for the descendants of the Girmitiyas to be actually called Fijians, to truly become a part of our nation and participate fully in our national life. When the Fiji First government and the Beni Marama government in 2013 declared through our constitution that all of us are Fijians and all of us are equal and united as one nation, as one people, it was the realization and the hopes and the dreams of the hundreds of thousands of direct descendants of the Girmitiyas. While many of their ancestors may have never heard of Fiji prior to their arrival, in that moment, in 2013, this nation truly became your home and will remain so for all time. The journey has been long, too long, many would argue, and not without difficulty. Yet here we all stand, more united than ever before, and all committed to taking Fiji into the future. It is not the duty of any one community to remember the sacrifices and suffering that led up to this commemoration. We must all remember, we must all reflect, and we must all uphold the legacy of the Girmitiyas. In the same way they strove to build better lives for their descendants, we must strive to leave behind a nation that is better than what we inherited. I would like to echo the announcement by His Excellency the President in his statement at the commemoration held in Suva earlier this week. In 2020, which is in about 3 years' time, for the 100-year anniversary of the end of the indenture system, we will be holding special commemorations throughout Fiji to mark the end of the indentured era. So those of you who may not know, even though the last ship came in 1916, indenture actually ended in 1920. And therefore in 2020 will be exactly 100 years since the end of the indenture, and we will be commemorating that in a big way in 2020. Coincidentally also, ladies and gentlemen, 2020 happens to be the 50th year of Fiji's independence too, in the same year. So of course, we will have many commemorations in respect of that, and celebrations of course. My fellow Fijians, it is also an emotional day for all of us as we remember the past trauma and look back into our history. But it is also a day of celebration for how far we have come. Let us all give thanks for the Girmitiyas and their descendants, and let us all try and live up to the example of perseverance and determination that they displayed despite the trying circumstances. हमारा हिंदी तो बहुत अच्छा नहीं है, but हम फिजी हिंदी में बात करेगा, because फिजी हिंदी भी तो जानो एक लैंग्वेज है जो गिरमिट के कारण डेवलप है. different parts of India से people आए रहा, South India से, पंजाब से, बंगाल से, बिहार से, यूपी से, अपन सबको अपन भाषा बात करते रहा, but एक दूसरे से उनके बात करेंगे, उन्होंने फिजी बात निकाली, जो बोलता फिजी बात. जो आज हम लोग यहाँ पर इकट्ठा हुआ है, 100 years होएंगे जो लास्ट जहाज जो लेके आए थे सतलज 5 जो गिरमिटिया लोग लेके आए थे, तो वो जो आज हम लोग यहाँ गिरा हुआ है कि हम लोग मार्क करता है कि 100 साल होएंगे. बट हम लोग ये चाहिए याद करो कि जो गिरमिटिया लोगों ने उन लोग कौन मुश्किलात से गुजरी से जलील गए, मारा गए, चाबुक मारा गए, बेइज्जती करा के, इतना कठिन उन लोगों के जो गिरमिट रहा, इतना कठिन रहा, कुछ तो खुदकुशी भी कर लेता, गुजरना मुश्किल रहा। बाकी ये कहानी में भी एक रोशनी भी है कि वो लोग जो सर्वाइव कर रहा, जो इंडेंजर पर काट ली रहा, वो लोग कैसे फिजी में उन्नति करी से शायद अपने लिए उन्नति कर पाया है, बराबर लड़कन के उन्नति कराई। फिजी में जहाँ जहाँ जानो गन्ना की खेत रहा, किसान बन रहा, वहाँ सब स्कूल बनाए, कम्युनिटी स्कूल चल रहा कि लड़कन के पढ़ाओ, उनके तालीम दो, शिक्षा दो, एजुकेट करो, तो वो लोग भी सके पर लाइफ में आगे बढ़े। जैसे अभी बताया इंग्लिश में कि हम लोग जो टाइम फिजी के इतिहास लिखा गए हैं, ये इतिहास में गिरमिटाला स्टोरी नहीं शामिल करा गए हैं, छोड़ देवा गए। गोरा लोग तो लिखे रहा हम लोग के इतिहास, स्कूल में वही सिखावा गया, बतावा गया कि हम लोग माइग्रेंट्स है, क्योंकि हम एक्चुअल माइग्रेंट नहीं रहा, लावा गया। वो टाइम ब्रिटिश के भी राज रहा इंडिया में, ब्रिटिश इंडिया तभी से हम बोलता है, वो टाइम ना बांग्लादेश रहा ना पाकिस्तान रहा, सब ब्रिटिश इंडिया रहा। वही लोग के राज में हम लोग यहाँ भेजा गया। ढेर जन जो जहाज में आई रहा, लोग तो मालूम नहीं रहा फिजी कहाँ है। वो लोग कह रहा अपन भाजी तरकारी खरीदे मार्केट में कोई जगह इंडिया में, तो कोई बोले आओ, बोले यहाँ जहाज में बैठो तुम्हें अच्छा काम मिल जाए। कोई सोची ना कि बोले फिजी यही बस इंडिया में कोई जगह है। तो ढेर जन तो जानो बगैर जाने आएंगे यहाँ पर। जो मुश्किलात लोग फेस करी नहीं, ये हम लोग के इतिहास में नहीं लिखा गया है। बट इस सरकार बताए हैं कि हम लोग चाहिए इतिहास में लिखाओ, बताए कि हम लोग चाहिए इसके बारे में बात करो, इसके बारे में चाहिए समझो, लड़कन के चाहिए समझो कौन सी बहरा, कौन हालात से लोग गुजरी रहा। क्योंकि अगर हम लोग ये सब चीज नहीं समझेगा, ये सब चीज लोग नहीं बताएगा, तो हम लोग एक कंट्री कभी आगे बढ़े नहीं बढ़ेगा। दिल में खोट रही, दिल में खोट रही कि अरे भाई हम लोग के तो बुजुर्ग लोग कौन कौन हालात से गुजरी रहा, अभी भी तंग करा जाए, बोले सेकंड क्लास सिटीजन है। बाकी जो नवा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, 2013 वाला कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, पहला मर्तबा एक कंट्री में बतावा गया है कि सब कोई एक है, सब कोई फिजियन है, सब कोई बराबर है, सबके इक्वल हक है। ये बहुत अहम वाली बात है, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात है। ये चीज के हम लोग समझो कि पहला मर्तबा ये चीज है और ना कभी हक कोई अब ले पाए, क्योंकि हम लोग कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा गया है। और इस चीज की चाहिए हम लोग इज्जत करो कि अब भे हम लोग के देश में, हम लोग के वतन में चीज भे। तो हम लोग जो सब गैदरिंग करा है, पूरा सब टाउन वगैरह सुबह में भे, नसोरी में भे, सिंगटोका, नागुआ, नांदी, लटोका, बाग, ताबुआ, रखी ओबलाऊ, लेबुका में, वहाँ भी भे। आज यहाँ है, आज लास्ट जगह हुए हैं। ये वजह के लिए कि हम लोग मनता कि जितना ढेर जाने की काम है, रिकग्नाइज करो कि काम है। और 2020 में 3 साल बाद जानो एक 100 ईयर्स हुई थी कि जब गिरमिट खलास हुए, 1920 में गिरमिट खलास हुए। तो ऐसे हम लोग के प्रेसिडेंट भी बताए से हिज एक्सलेंसी कि हम लोग 2020 में इस चीज़ के विषय कोमेमोरेट करेगा। और 2020 में भी फिजी के इंडिपेंडेंस जानो 50 ईयर्स भी हुई थी। तो दोनों इम्पोर्टेंट चीज एक साल में हुई। बट हम मतलब आप लोगों ने बताया कि ये चीज हम लोग के खुल के बात करो। जैसे हम लोग ईताओ के भाई बहन लोग के, इन लोग के भी कुछ मुश्किलात रहा, वो भी इतिहास में नहीं लिखा गया है। इन लोग के तो आप जनता है कि about 25,000 ईताओ के पीपल मीजल्स बेरा मर गए रहा, एक लागे जिस एक साल में 25,000 ईताओ के पीपल डाइड बिकॉज ऑफ मीजल्स। ढेर चीज दे। तो कोई कंट्री कभी आगे नहीं सके बढ़े अगर हम लोग अपन पूरा इतिहास खुल के बात नहीं करेगा। तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात है। यही जो गवर्नमेंट है मांगे हम लोग खुल के बात करो। ये सब चीज़ के अगर हम लोग इसमें कंफर्टेबल रहेगा तो हम उसको आगे बढ़ेगा। जब भी हम लोग देखता है आदमी जात पात धर्म मजहब पे झूठ इश्यू लावे हैं, बट हम लोग के चाहिए फोकस रहो कि कैसे हम लोग अपन कंट्री के आगे बढ़ाएगा, कैसे सबके इल्म देगा, कैसे हम लोग गरीबी हटाएगा, कैसे हम लोग अपन इकोनॉमी बढ़ाएगा। तो तभी समाज यहाँ इकट्ठा हुआ है। जो बुजुर्ग लोग यहाँ हैं उन लोग के भी हम लोग कुछ छोटा सा तोहफा भी देगा, उन लोग के भी रिकॉग्नाइज करेगा कि सब चीज़ फिजी में भी है। What I've just said, ladies and gentlemen, I've just summarized essentially what I said, but I also pointed out again that the narrative of our country does not include many parts of our history. Many of the children do not, for example, know some of the problems that the Ethiopian people also went through that is not openly discussed, is not included in our narrative. We do not know, for example, that many Ethiopian people died, about 25,000 died nearly 1 year because of measles. And there are many other issues in terms of land. So we need to be able to be mature as a people to be able to move forward and also talk to them about the difficulties that they went through. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank all those people who turned up in all the different centers in Fiji where we had these celebrations. We had enormous numbers of people, highly emotional, highly educational, and highly forward-looking. And I'd also like to thank the Girmit Council that was part and parcel of the celebrations. The chairman of the Girmit Council was able to join us in the Latoka celebrations on Thursday last week. And all those people who contributed to it, I'd like to acknowledge the committee here. It's not necessarily an easy task to put all the things together. We'd like to thank them. Let's put our hands together for the committee, ladies and gentlemen. And also to the students, I'd like to especially appeal to you. You may think that you're students now and you remain students, but please remember, some of you will be having families very soon, some of you will be working very soon, you'll become leaders, some of you could be members of parliament over here. It's very important for you to understand what the history of your country is, what is the true history of your country. Because if you're able to understand that, be able to come to terms with it, then you actually make good leaders, you'll make good mothers and fathers and contributors to your community. So I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank in particular Honorable Praveen Kumar Bala for this initiative. He's been working very hard and organizing this all throughout the centers and his team. And we look forward to further commemorations of this. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here on a Saturday morning to be part and parcel of this commemoration. And I wish you a good day. Thank you.
Let me put our hands together and say thank you very much. We do really miss them at this stage. Hope they were around us, with us as we journey. We all get emotional when we think of our loved one. My dear friends, amongst one of the recipients is Bafutun Saizat, has been a recipient of the British Emperor Medal.
Ni ska du visa. Det har ni kan